of its kind regional conversation of policymakers on homelessness. I'd like to thank all the nonprofits and others in the room who work so hard every day on the front lines to support our homeless population. As a social worker myself, what you do often goes without fanfare and with far too few resources, but yet you persevere and you do the work that really makes a difference every day. I want to thank my assistant, Jamila, who's, I think, there she is, who helped organize this summit, but also who has been a very outspoken advocate for youth homelessness, and she brings that commitment to this conversation. The Metro Boston region is unique in the sense that if we were to pick up our communities and place them almost anywhere else in the country, we would be one large city. But in Massachusetts, we're all these small fiefdoms that have our own forms of government, our own identities, and our own way of doing things. Yet, despite these differences, we're dealing with many of the same issues. We are all struggling with affordable housing, with income insecurity, climate change, improving our public schools, and we're all struggling to support our homeless residents. Although we have these similarities, it's rare, if ever, that we get together in this way to learn from one another, to collaborate with one another, and to work together to improve conditions for those in our respective communities. I have high hopes for what will come of our collective efforts, and I hope that we can set an example for future collaborative efforts on other important issues that we all share, because none of our cities can solve these issues alone. When we look around the Boston area, many of our communities are seeing tremendous growth. There's construction going on all around. We are the biotech capital of the world. Our universities are thriving. It would be easy for one to think that wealth and prosperity are in abundance. But there's another story in our communities. While surrounded by all this growth, many in our communities are struggling. They're struggling to pay the rent. They're struggling to pay the bills. They're struggling to put food on the table. And many are struggling with homelessness. We will not be the socially and economically just communities we all want to be until we do a better job of supporting our most vulnerable residents. Homelessness knows no borders. It crosses all demographics. Whether someone is homeless because they lost their job or because they're escaping domestic violence or they're struggling with mental health or addiction issues, homelessness has many root causes. It's easy for those in our community to look at a homeless person and think they just don't want to work or they did this to themselves. Well, I have 4 children, and I've been a social worker for 25 years with children, and no child I have ever known has ever said that when they grow up, they want to be homeless, or when they grow up, they want to be an addict. We must remember that those who we see in our streets, under our bridges, and in our shelters were all children once. They all had hopes and dreams and goals that somewhere along the way went astray. And in a time when the income gap continues to grow and more individuals and families find themselves financially vulnerable and unable to save for the future, we will continue to see more and more people on the verge of homelessness unless we make a commitment to investing our time and resources to change this course. We know that the way to end homelessness is to provide people with homes. That, unfortunately, is complicated and not a fix that will come quickly. So as we move forward, I would like us to think both of long and short-term goals. Because as we move forward with creating more housing, investing in support services and battling income insecurity, we can't lose sight that there are people who need shelter tonight, there are people who need food tonight, and there are people who need our help tonight. Although we may not solve homelessness in this room, I'm excited and grateful for the opportunity to work together and to learn from each other. And again, I want to thank everybody for being here and taking part in this. A couple housekeeping issues. Today's meeting will be, we will see a presentation from the various communities on what homelessness looks like in their community, what services are currently in place, and what they're working on for the future, and then we'll have some discussion. We will be scheduling additional quarterly meetings that will include hearing from experts at the state level, and the nonprofit level. We will look at where we overlap in services, where there are gaps in our services, how we can fill those gaps to provide a stronger safety net, and how we can band together to advocate as a region at the state and federal level. We will be creating, I say we, Jamila will be creating, you don't want me doing it, a web page where we will post all of the presentations from today, as well as information about future meetings, so that folks are in the community can access that information. Our meetings will be taped and will be available both on our webpage as well as the City of Cambridge webpage. Bathrooms are out that way for folks that need it. And without further ado, that's enough for me. Boston is going to lead off with the presentation. Do we have everyone get a hard copy of? Did you? Extras on the table, folks. If there aren't enough hard copies, again, all these presentations will be posted online by next week. And if you want hard copies, just indicate that to Jamila, and we can certainly get them and send them to you. We are not going to be having public comment at this meeting today. This is just an opportunity for us to hear what each other is doing. At future meetings, we will certainly schedule an opportunity for folks from the public to be able to talk to us about what they think is working well and where they think things we need to improve on. So without further ado, are you guys, Boston, ready to go? If you could just introduce yourself, your title, and then lead us through, that would be great.
Sure. Hello. Hello. Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm sorry my back is to all of you, but you don't have to see the sweat dripping off my face. So, in classic form, City of Boston person crosses the river and gets lost. So I ran through the Harvard campus and made a fool of myself, and I'm sweating, but I'm really happy to be here. I'm very sorry to be late. So who am I?
I don't go across the river, so I'm glad that you actually made it over. Thank you.
I don't either. So my name is Lila Bernstein. I work for the City of Boston. I am newly appointed to the mayor's office as the mayor's advisor for the initiative to end chronic homelessness. I've been working in the housing department for the last few years and just got appointed into this brand new position. We've never had it before in August. So I'm still embedded in the housing department, and the reason for that is because the way to end homelessness is through housing and services. And in Boston, this may not be the case in every city here, but in Boston, the housing department is also the lead agency for the federal funds that come in called Continuum of Care, or McKinney. It has a lot of names, like most federal things, but the McKinney, Vento, federal dollars or the Continuum of Care dollars come through the housing department. We get about $24 million specifically for homeless housing. So most of this is housing. We leverage services for chronically homeless individuals, veterans, and other priority populations. So here we are. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where we are in Boston and talk a lot about the Mayor's Action Plan to End Veteran and Chronic Homelessness in Boston that was released last year and goes through 2018. So first, I'll give you an overview of our numbers, as I was asked to. I'm going to tell you about our action plan and a little bit about progress to date. Does this seem a little wide? Can everyone read it? Okay. So this is from our point in time count. That's the single night count that every community is required to do. We had this last January, we had 167 individuals on the street that particular night. There were 1,732 individuals in emergency shelter and 1,250 families in emergency shelter. That's family units. That's not individuals and families, that's family units. Our shelter capacity is 1,486 emergency shelter beds. That's for single adults. We do add overflow beds in cold weather. We have 701 transitional housing beds. We consider people who are in transitional housing homeless, and so do all of you. That's how the federal government defines transitional housing. It's time-limited housing, so it really isn't permanent. We had 1,253 shelter units for families, and our shelter, I want to mention, in Boston has no barriers. So we don't have any rules about who can come in and who can't. And it really is a best practice to have what's called low threshold threshold shelter. It's also a best practice to have low threshold housing. But in the case of shelter, there are lots of communities that right now in Massachusetts screen people out for certain reasons, maybe because they're not sober when they arrive, or they are a registered sex offender, or they don't fit the eligibility criteria. They're not being compliant. That's not really how Boston shelters operate. We really let everyone in. Occasionally if someone's extremely violent, they do get barred from one shelter, but then they might pop up in another. So all of our shelters are low threshold, and I'd love to have a conversation about spreading that practice to other communities. I also want to mention here we have Beth Grand, who works for the Boston Public Health Commission. She is the executive director, and she oversees the shelters that are run by Boston Public Health Commission, as well as the housing program run by Boston Public Health Commission. It accounts for almost half of our single adult system. So Beth's here. You want to wave, Beth? And many other things are happening at Beth's shop, so I'm going to refer to Beth in a few different places. Okay. Whoops, wrong button. Overview. So before I dive in, why does our plan focus on housing? I kind of gave that one away. Housing's the way to end homelessness. It's not focused on shelter, that rant I just gave about shelter policy. That's really not what the plan's focused on. It's focused on making sure we have the housing resources to end homelessness. Why do we prioritize chronically homeless individuals and homeless veterans? There are a few reasons. For chronically homeless individuals, let me define chronic homelessness. It is long-term homelessness for people who have long-term disabilities. There's a more complex definition that some of the folks in the room know, but that's what it boils down to. It's people who are homeless for a year or longer and have some kind of long-term disability. And there are a lot of reasons to focus on them. First, they are highly vulnerable. They're the most stuck in homelessness in our systems. They're the ones we've failed for the longest. They're also taking up a considerable amount of resources, even though the outcomes are bad. Even though they're homeless for a long time, we are still spending a lot of public dollars on them. So there's an opportunity there to spend dollars in a much better way. And they are the most vulnerable within the homeless population. Why focus on homeless veterans? So one reason is it's moral imperative. We owe our veterans more than just a shelter bed. We owe them a home. We also have an opportunity to prevent a whole generation of veterans from becoming homeless, unlike we have in generations past. And I'll just say that both of those populations have been highly prioritized by the federal government. So we actually have more significant resources prioritized to these populations than we do have for other populations. And so we have some resources to actually achieve the goals of ending chronic and veteran homelessness. And then why does our plan focus on single adults and not families? So I don't want to give the impression that Boston doesn't care about homeless families, and I'll tell you a little bit right now about what we're doing for homeless families. But our plan is focused on single adults because that's the system that we have control over. The family shelter system is wholly controlled by the state, and we work in partnership with them a lot, but we couldn't really put out a strategic action plan for how to change and revolutionize that system and get it done, because we really don't have those strings to pull. So what we are doing for families, I will mention. So the city funds a significant number of shelter beds that are for families who do not qualify for the state system. So there's some shelter beds being funded by the city. We fund quite a bit of rapid rehousing for families, either out of those shelter beds or out of the family shelter system. Just recently, the city of Boston has created the Office of Housing Stability, which is very much focused on stabilizing households that are at risk of homelessness. In most cases, those are families that call the office right now. It's been a really successful model so far. Their business is through the roof, unfortunately, but they are, we really think it makes sense to have an office that's focused on that, particularly in high cost markets. And then last, there's a pilot right now that we're funding through one of our nonprofit partners, Project Hope, that embeds them in Boston public schools, certain public schools where we're piloting it. And the idea is for them to do outreach and connect homeless families to housing. So we're doing a lot on families, but we didn't release a strategic plan around families for the reasons I've cited. So this plan is just about single adults. Ooh, there we go. Okay. This is supposed to make your eyes hurt. And it's not even half the story, unfortunately. So at the top, these are all places where people maybe are released to homelessness, or where they are right before they become homeless, or in some cases where they are homeless. There are a whole bunch of different places, including jails, prisons. People get released from there and come straight to the homeless system. Psych hospitals, detox, day programs, street outreach, all of those, the VA. And the middle is kind of our transitional housing and shelter system. We have many different shelters and many different programs in Boston, and it gets really complicated. So people get sent willy-nilly to different places. It's not always exactly what they need, but it's where they are. And then it's really complicated. Really, the maze just starts there, and getting into housing is incredibly complex, and it shouldn't be. And so what happens is the people who make it out are those with fewer barriers and not those who have the most complex challenges. So it is our responsibility to undo this mess. We created it. It's our responsibility to make it easier for the most vulnerable people to get to housing, which is what is needed to end homelessness. I'm going to keep saying that. So this is what the plan's about. It's really about creating a unified homeless response system, working in collaboration. We have some of the best providers in the Metro Boston area. There's no doubt about it. None of us would argue that we don't. But really what's needed to get better outcomes is to have a single response system that's working together in lockstep. So it doesn't matter which door someone shows up at. If it's the wrong door, there's a very warm handoff to the right door. And that right door says, yes, we will serve that person because we can serve them better. So the action plan goals. And veteran homelessness and chronic homelessness. And to reach goal 1 or goal 2, we're going to have to transform our entire system. So a big part of what we're doing in Boston is changing how we do business from the day people arrive and are homeless for the first time, all the way through to when we get them into housing. I'll talk more about that in a minute. So I'm going to talk about progress, but then I'm going to talk about how we're getting it done. So don't freak out that I skipped that. We're going to go back to it. So this is where we are right now. The mayor announced in the State of the City in January that we had ended chronic homelessness among veterans. So this is that federal definition I talked about before, long-term homelessness for people with long-term disabilities. Those who were chronically homeless and a veteran in the city of Boston, we've housed everyone, except a few who have refused housing, and we are continuing to work with them and offer them housing. This isn't just something... Okay, so nothing's... I was just ignoring it. Nothing's going wrong? Okay. Okay, good. I'm very focused. So, what was I going to say? So, no one else seemed alarmed, so I was just pretending it wasn't happening. So... A few things about this. We're not just claiming to have done this. We're not patting ourselves on our back and saying we did this. We were certified by the federal government. It was very rigorous to get certified. There was a lot of proof points we had to provide. And this is something that requires constant vigilance, because there are veterans who become chronically homeless over the course of a year. And so we have a system in place that I will tell you about in a minute that really is about making sure as veterans are becoming chronically homeless, we're also prioritizing them for housing. Someday we hope to have a system where nobody becomes chronically homeless. That's what we're aiming for. We've also reduced the number of homeless veterans in the city of Boston by 44%. So that's that point in time number that I showed at the beginning. When you look at the number of veterans that were in that point in time count, and then you rewind 2 years, it was a 44% drop, which is absolutely remarkable. It's not zero, but it is a significant reduction, and so we're still working at it. We're not done by any means. When we now count homeless veterans every night. So it's not just that once a year. We're counting every night. We're asking our providers who was a veteran and homeless in your shelter. We're asking street outreach, and what we find is that there are 5 or fewer homeless veterans on the street any given night. They're the biggest number of homeless veterans in the city of Boston are in transitional housing at the New England Center and Homes for Vets. They're still homeless because they're not in permanent housing, but they do have a bed. So we've housed 770 homeless veterans since July of 2014. Thank you. Yes. And many of the providers in the audience were part of that success. The city of Boston did not house anyone directly. It's all through partner agencies, including Public Health Commission and others. So it's a lot of homeless veterans, but we're still going. For a while, we were housing about one homeless veteran a day. It has slowed a bit because we have fewer homeless veterans at any given time, but we're almost still on that same pace. And we've created a system where we're really making sure as veterans become homeless in the city of Boston, we quickly put them back on a pathway to housing. So we're not going to get to zero. Even the communities that said they've ended all veteran homelessness, they're not at zero because people become homeless every day. It's really about having a really efficient system, not letting anyone fall through the cracks, making sure you're offering housing from day one. Chronic homelessness. So this is I don't know what to say. This is a really hard problem. So we started in January 2016 with 612 chronically homeless individuals in the city of Boston, which actually sounds pretty small, right? That's not thousands of people. It's 612. We see 10,000 people over the course of a year in the city of Boston system, but only at a point in time, only 612 are chronically homeless. Most people are not chronically homeless. Most people use the shelter system for a much shorter period of time. Many people use it for 30 days or less, just as an emergency crisis response. But there are others who get stuck, who don't quite read the definition of chronic homelessness. It's really a small percentage that become chronically homeless. So since then, we've housed 186 chronically homeless individuals. So 612 minus 186, we have 3 years, we're going to make it. Problem is people become chronically homeless over time. So we're very proud of this number. We're working very hard, but we know we have to do more to actually get this number down to zero in 3 years. So we've increased the number of permanent support, PSHs, permanent supportive housing. PSH, and let me explain what that is. PSH is permanent supportive housing. Permanent supportive housing is long-term, affordable, deeply subsidized housing on one hand. So it's deeply subsidized housing and long-term support services. And that is the magic formula that ends chronic homelessness. You can't do it without one or the other. So permanent supportive housing refers to when you have both and it's permanent. So we've increased the number of units available for chronically homeless individuals by 100 just over this last year. 50 of those housing vouchers came from the state, and we leveraged mostly Medicaid services for those and a few other types of services. The other 50 have been leveraged from the Boston Housing Authority, and the services, again, are either Medicaid funded or city funded. We've launched this initiative to end chronic homelessness among elders. We define elder homelessness, and we're not alone in this, as anyone who's 50 years old or older, which sounds young. And people get offended, but please don't. The reason why it's so young is because people are homeless. I've heard different things from different studies. So some studies say they're clinically 10 years older than their born age. Other studies say 20 years older than their born age. And it's because of the strain that homelessness puts on people's body and their medical conditions. So there's a reason to focus on people who are 50 and older. When I ran the numbers on our most recent active list, it's 57% of our chronically homeless population are 50 and older. So most of our chronically homeless individuals in Boston are elders. And I'll tell you a little bit more about how we're doing that. And then last, we built this housing matching engine that we call our coordinated access system. We didn't build it. We paid someone to build it. But we built it with you all in mind, not just you, but the whole country. So we hired a really kind of hip tech vendor to build this for us, and they use open source code, and then we've licensed it that way, which means public entities, we haven't allowed private entities to take it, but public entities can take the code of this housing matching engine and use it for their purposes. So we want to share that, and we want to spread it around. The reason why this applies to everybody is because the matching engine takes the federally mandated homeless data fields called the HMIS system, Homeless Management Information System. It takes all this data that we all have to collect on homeless individuals. It sucks it into the matching engine. And then all of our contractors that provide homeless housing with that $24 million we get a year tell us when there's a vacancy and what services go along with those resources. And it does this fancy match, just like Expedia, and it matches the most vulnerable person to the right vacancies. And so it's in Boston, we've decided to rank it based on first date homeless in Boston. So right now it's just working for chronically homeless individuals. We've matched 3 people successfully through the system so far. We're refining things and trying to grow this, but it is there to share. So please come talk to me if you're interested in hearing more about it. How am I doing on time? I have so much to say. I'm okay? How much more time do I have? 10 minutes. Yeah. Okay.
This is Everett and Chelsea didn't come, so
I got their time.
We got some extra time to play with.
Okay, good. Thank you. So this is how we're doing it. We are working from by name lists. And I have to say, Boston didn't make any of this up. Everybody's doing this stuff, or not everybody, but, most communities are doing some versions of this. We stole it from all across the country. So we're not claiming to have invented any of this, but we're telling you what's working for us. So we are working from a by name list for veterans. So we know every single homeless veteran in the city of Boston. We know where they're staying. We know who their case manager is. We know their housing plan. We know what's happened in their housing history. We have it all on one spreadsheet that people can access, and we're getting it done. And we've done the same thing for the chronically homeless individuals in the city of Boston. That visual, which you may not be able to see, is purple people sitting around a brown table. And that's really how we do it. We come together every week, and a few of us are missing the weekly chronic homeless meeting right now. Those purple people are meeting in Boston. So every week for chronically homeless, every week for homeless veterans, and we're looking at this by name list, and we're checking, what's going on with this person, what's the plan for this person, where are the resource gaps? Because when you get that granular, you really start to see what your system misses, and then the city goes back and makes some calls and tries to get more resources for the effort. At the same time, we have leadership teams for the Veterans Initiative and the Chronic Homeless Initiative. So these purple middle manager people, they have companion counterparts at the leadership teams. It's more like chief program officers and high-level policymakers in city and state government, who can start doing some of that barrier busting and get more resources. So that system is really, really working for us. So we've set targets, we're using data, blah, blah, blah. So bureaucracies. A lot of homelessness is caused because bureaucracies have failed people. People got handed from one to another and fell through the cracks, or they never really got connected to a bureaucracy, or the bureaucracy has too many rules, too many meetings, whatever. And so that's not always why someone's homeless, but often bureaucracies have failed people who are homeless. So our job is to fix those bureaucracies and make them work for the people who we've failed. And that includes city bureaucracies across the board, including the housing department. So, we're all to blame, and we are all sitting together in a new way and thinking through how can we be more flexible. And so one way we've done that is through what we call housing surge events. And the surge mentality. And so housing surge events are these one-time morning events where we've invited a targeted group. So we use our by name lists, and we know exactly who we're inviting. We know exactly what resources we have, and we have housing and service resources available. And the so cute. It's very, very sweet the way she said that. So lost my train of thought. So housing surge events. So the idea is to get people housing that day. This is not a fair. It's not about information. It's not, filling out applications. It's getting it done that day. And so we don't always succeed in that goal. Some people get partway there, but a lot of people have come to our housing surge events and have left with housing and services. So we've hosted 6. Again, we didn't come up with this idea. Someone told us about it. Chicago did it or something. And now we're addicted to the tool. So we've hosted 6 since last November. The first 3 were for homeless veterans. The last 3 have been for chronically homeless individuals. And I want to tell you about the last one. This is a picture of the 50 volunteers who arrived before sunrise. You might be able to tell that the sun is not up yet. This is before the guests have arrived. So the reason we get together at 5 a.m. is because individuals are transported directly from shelter, and a lot of our shelters have people leave bright and early in the morning, or people leave bright and early in the morning on their own volition. So we catch them as they're leaving. It's voluntary, but we encourage them to come We provide transportation, we provide a hot breakfast, we provide gift cards, and then we try to get people housed. So this last event was July 28th in South Boston, and it was for chronically homeless elders. And what we did was in the past, we had housing vouchers available and rapid rehousing. So both in those scenarios, people had to go and do a housing search. In this case, we had housing authority units available for people that day that had been targeted for chronically homeless elders. We had negotiated an MOU between the housing department in the city of Boston and the Boston Housing Authority that they would create a super priority for this population as long as we could get these elders services. So that was the condition. So the trick for this day was to get people enrolled in services and then get them a unit from BHA and have them walk out with both. And 15 people were able to do that. We had 22 participants. 15 people walked out with it was 16 people who walked out with housing authority units. One came in with one. So I say 15. A few people walked out with vouchers because they weren't going to make it through the housing authority process. Most people walked out with housing. The people who didn't had either rejected it or were in process for some reason. We're going to do this again, November 17th. It was extremely successful. The services that we leveraged were some of the regular Medicaid services that we've used in homelessness before, but there was one new program at the table that we've never been able to use for homeless individuals. And it's available in most Metro Boston communities, maybe not all, I'll have to ask. It's called the PACE program. It stands for Program of All-Inclusive Care for Elders. And they become responsible, they provide case management, in-home nursing, mental health, everything people need. Medical, they have day centers. I mean, it's everything people need who are elders. And it's actually a nursing home diversion program. So it's for people who are quite ill and quite sick. And they're not set up well to serve homeless people. They are responsible for every drop of medical care that person receives. So if they lose track of them, their costs go through the roof because they're not keeping the care within their network. But what we did was we said, look, these people are going to be housed in 2 or 3 weeks. Can you please enroll them? They'll get the super priority. This marriage will happen. It'll be beautiful. It'll be the 2 things that someone needs. And they took a chance. And they did it with one PACE program did it with us. Now at this next surge, they all want in. All 4 Boston PACE programs want to be part of it. So it's a great model. I can tell people more about it later. So faith community, they're starting to get organized behind the mayor's action plan. Here you see people from the faith communities provided breakfast at that event. They moved people. They help people get furniture afterwards. And they've created this group called it's called Boston Home Interfaith Collaborative. It's 38 faith communities in the greater Boston area that are all organized to support the mayor's action plan to end chronic and veteran homelessness. How many more minutes do I have? 2? 2. So front door triage. So these are our strategies. I want to, Beth, can I put you on the spot about front door triage, or you want me to do it?
No, I can do it.
Okay, so I'll tee you up. So front door triage. So these are the 4 strategies in our plan. I've talked about coordinated access. That's a housing matching system. I talked about permanent supportive housing. That's housing, long-term services. The other 2 are about preventing chronic homelessness. Rapid rehousing is short-term dollars that help people who don't need a long-term, housing voucher, but do need some help in the housing market to get back on their feet. First month, last month, security deposit. So rapid rehousing is short-term housing resources. And then front door triage is about triaging people as they first become homeless. And we have a pilot front door triage at Boston Public Health Commission and Pine Street Inn are the majority of our shelter beds. And I just want to turn it over to Beth to say a few things about front door triage and how it's working.
You want me to come up?
I told you
I
to
can
come
talk
up.
pretty loud. I'll try to be quick. Do that. Is that on? Okay. Well, first of all, I just want to say I've been doing this for 29 years. I've been in the field, started at Long Island Shelter. And I think the thing that has happened in Boston since the closing of Long Island Shelter and the creation of this plan has not only been the coordination, the working as a single system, but also the amount of resources that have been put in to really making a commitment to solve homelessness in a way that we always hit a barrier, over all of the years years prior to this. And I think front door triage is like a perfect example of that. You know, we have a 400-person shelter and a 260-person shelter. We've never had the ability to have everybody who wanted to see a case manager be able to see a case manager. Now, with the investment into front door triage, we have actually 5 staff. Pine Street Inn, I think, has 4 additional staff. And every single person that comes in that's new is asked, "Hi, how are you? What do you need? And how can we get you out of here?" That has changed the culture in the shelter in a way that we always struggled with, and that everybody knows there's a path out and everybody's given an offer. And we basically do it 3 different ways. There's diversion. So if somebody comes into the shelter and they have another alternative, if they have a home in another part of the state, if you know, they have family to go to, we work with them with that day or the next day to get them back where they need. Sometimes that's a bus ticket. Sometimes that's, you know, just helping them get an appointment so they can go back home. So that's the first thing we do. And then the other thing that we do is that we basically say, can we do something reasonable to get you out of here within 60 days? And if we can, then with that front door triage person stays with them and makes a referral, whether it be to treatment, to, you know, to rapid rehousing, or, you know, whatever it is that they need next. If we see in those first days that it's going to take more than 60 days, then what we'll do is we'll refer them to our more thorough job training or you know, other transitional programs that we have. So it's been really unbelievably impactful. I didn't bring my numbers, but the numbers that we have seen, and we've been able to really divert and move on, and the way that it's really changed the culture within the shelter and giving people hope is pretty amazing.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Beth. So that's it. I'm not going to bore you too much longer. These are all our partners. We're probably missing some. This list keeps growing. As you can see, it's a lot of city, state, federal, but then a lot of nonprofits and our faith partners. And then last, we have a website, just started. We're branding our initiative not as the Mayor's Action Plan to End Chronic and Veteran Homelessness anymore. Now we're at Boston's Way Home. We have a Twitter account, so feel free to track us that way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Don't go anywhere yet. I got it. Just while we get set up, Cambridge is next up. I did this in alphabetical order, so, you know, fair. Just on I know you also do, and I'm thinking short term now, not the bigger picture, but one thing that I had looked at and was interested in doing here. Boston does. You have warming centers and sobering centers in Boston.
Yeah, but Beth, can you come back? I don't know if it's the night center or the night center or one.
So how do those work? How do you run them? Where's the money come from?
Yeah, so I mean, I think what we have the Boston Night Center, which is located down in downtown Boston, and it's actually a center club during the day, and then in the evening it opens up, and people are able to come in as couples. There aren't beds, there aren't cots, but they're able to sit down. And what we're now doing is actually having some of the triage work that we've been doing in the shelter take place within the warming centers, so that the next morning we can try to hook them up either by helping them get to a DRAPE program for services or, you know, somewhere else, so that we're kind of trying to all work together about that. And, you know, and in the winter we work very closely on ensuring that all the beds are at full capacity, that we're transporting people to where they need to go.
Yeah, and on the, is that different than, because we've talked a little bit about sobering centers. So we've talked with the Health Alliance, for example, and health costs, and you know, we have, you know, folks that you know, go to the emergency room a lot, and that really drives up, you know, costs, and you know, so there was been some conversations about, can there be other you know, if it's someone who's intoxicated, or instead of taking them to the emergency room, is there another
We actually
possibility
the,
for
the
that?
Boston Public Health Commission actually has a program called HUES, which is High Utilizers of Emergency Services, and it's a partnership with EMS and with the Boston Police Department and Pine Street, who's here, street outreach workers. And when somebody who is a high utilizers of the emergency room is identified, regardless of what shape they're in, they're actually taken to our shelter where we have some lounge chairs where we do some kind of engagement. And hopefully it's this idea of this targeted group that we as a whole community try to work with to try to take care of in a kind of a better way. But all of our shelters are low threshold, so in some ways all of our shelters are kind of that sobering center, because that's what we all do.
Right.
So
Okay, great. Did anyone have any quick questions for Boston?
Hey, Mark, before Boston gets off the dais,
Oh,
a lot of us since the closing of
wait,
Long Island have been concerned about the displacement of treatment beds for people who are dealing with different forms of addiction. Back about a year ago, on the first anniversary of the closing of Long Island, we got a commitment to relocate about 60
So-
of those beds in Stoughton. And then the city said, oh no, we don't want them in Stoughton, we want them to be in Boston. And then the city wouldn't find a place to locate the beds. So I'm wondering if we can get a commitment here that the city of Boston isn't going to be an obstacle to trying to provide services, because who knows how many people lost their life to addiction because the city of Boston couldn't locate a site that could provide these services. And now we're going to have to wait till the beginning of the year before those beds can go up. Guess where? In Stoughton, because there's certainly no other more critical factor, public health factor, homelessness and people dealing with substance use, right?
So I had said at the beginning that we're not taking public comment. Okay. I don't know if,
Get in, Mark, sorry.
yeah, well, hopefully that's the last that you'll sneak in today, because we do want to get through this. We are going to have other opportunities to hear from the public and to answer those questions. But I do want,
Make another one. Can they answer it?
well, I don't know if they want to answer it. That's
Why don't we connect afterwards? There's staff here from Boston Public Health Commission that would be able to talk with you about what's going on with the detox beds. But we absolutely want all of those detox beds replaced, and we've been working hard to make that happen.
so. Thank you. I appreciate it. So Cambridge, you guys want to switch spots and.
Thank you. Maybe while they're getting set up, I'm Ellen Semenoff. I'm the city's Assistant City Manager for Human Services, and I'm really just going to be introducing folks. First, thank you, Vice Mayor McGovern. He's been an enormous advocate and for services both for housing, for permanent supported housing, and for addressing homelessness. And we're grateful that you brought folks together today. I also want to take this opportunity to introduce our incoming new city manager, Louis DePasquale, who's here, and I think that's wonderful for all of us because I think it also illustrates his commitment to the work that is happening. And let me just say, I want to acknowledge we have 3 people who are presenting today and answering the questions. But if you look around the room, now we're lucky, we're the host community, but this room is filled with the people who do the work every day to support people who are homeless. We have members of the community who are currently or formerly homeless. We have our shelter providers. We have our mental health providers. We have the Public Health Department. We have the Cambridge Health Alliance, individual and family shelters. We have a whole array of people. And before we start our presentation, if you wouldn't mind, if you provide these services and work in Cambridge, would you mind just standing up so we can recognize the important work that you do? So the people who are presenting today for us, like with Boston, which was, by the way, a very inspiring presentation, the city is the applicant for the continuum of care. And the 2 of our presenters today, Shelley Chevalier and Liz Menders, are the people who oversee the homeless planning work and the continuum of care. And our other presenter is Sergeant Fred Cabral from the police department. I also want to acknowledge Deputy Superintendent Christine Elo, because we have many very important partners working around issues of homelessness in Cambridge. And I would say that the police are not just our partners, the police are critical partners in this with all of the service providers, along with the individual folks who are homeless in Cambridge. So they're part of our presentation in part because of that. So let me just turn this over to, I think, Shelley. Oh, Liz, okay.
Hey everyone. I also apologize having my back to the. Oh, sorry. The green light is on. Sorry, my back is to most of you here. Having a hard time getting this. Is that it? Okay. So also want to thank Boston for an awesome presentation. It's really exciting to hear the work that's going on there. So my parts of this are giving an overview of the data we have available on homelessness in Cambridge and doing a brief overview of the programs available to serve the population. Then I'm going to pass it to Shelley to talk about the plans moving forward, and then to Sergeant Cabral for some program spotlights. So the data sources, Lila did a great context setting on what the continuum of care is, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Just want to briefly explain the sources of the data that we're presenting today are all coming from the reports we're mandated to provide to HUD as a condition of a lot of that McKinney-Vento funding that we get. So 3 main data sources: the AHAR, the Annual Homeless Assessment Report, which is looking at a full federal fiscal year of data, the point-in-time count, which is the January snapshot, and then the housing inventory count, which happens on the same night. It's really looking at the supply, what units are available on that one night. Okay, I have a lot of numbers here. I promise I'm not going to go through everything, but I thought it would be helpful to have in the handout so people can have it. So this table is just showing a brief summary of how many people were served in each of these reporting categories. The acronyms here are Emergency Shelter for Families, Emergency Shelter for Individuals, ES-FAM, and ES-IND, and then Transitional Housing for Family, Transitional Housing for Individuals, Permanent Supportive Housing, and so on. So this just gives a snapshot of the projects that are contributing to HMIS, how many people stayed in these component types over the course of that federal fiscal year, and looking at the quarterly point-in-time counts. So emergency shelter for individuals is our largest category of units available. And then I have the line graph there to show, I think it's an interesting graphic presentation of how the emergency shelter utilization fluctuates over the course of the year with, as we'd expect, more folks in emergency shelter beds in the colder months, and when we have our seasonal shelters open. Again, another big table here, but I just want to highlight the length of stay for the emergency shelter for individual category right here. We have, over 70% of our guests using shelter are staying less than a month. So it's a really quick turnover. It's not to say that we don't see them in the next reporting year, but in that given 12-month reporting period, it's a very short overall length of stay in the emergency shelter category, much longer lengths of stay as we'd expect in the permanent housing category. And then the utilization rates for just in the individual categories, it gets a little funky with units versus persons in the family categories, but just wanted to show that we have really relatively high and stable utilization. There are some dips in the emergency shelter category when it gets a little bit warmer. And that annual turnover again demonstrates the short lengths of stay in that category. Sorry, this mouse is a little jumpy. I'm having a hard time. Okay. So then shifting to the point in time count, which is probably what most folks are more familiar with, hearing the homeless census around Cambridge. And this is a really, it's a HUD required report, but it's a great opportunity to once a year actually do a count of how many people are sleeping outdoors. So many of the partners here are involved in that massive effort, and this is the snapshot of the 2016 count, where we actually had almost 70 people unsheltered in Cambridge on that night, which is on the higher end for what we usually see. So I'm going to flip right to oh no, my data links did not make it in the presentation. I apologize. Hopefully you have a handout. That's my fault. I linked my bar graphs here to an Excel table, and I forgot to unlink it for the presentation. So I'm not going to go into this here. Yeah, but you have the hard copies, and I can correct this for what gets posted on the website. Sorry about that. So this is looking at the point in time count over time. I think it's helpful to see and sad to see that this is really pretty stable over time. There are fluctuations from year to year. I include the temperature there because often we see the unsheltered count impacted by the weather on the actual night of the count. And it's also an interesting demonstration of some of the quirks of this HUD data where sometimes when we see bumps or drops, it's purely an impact of a change in inventory. So the little bump up in the top diamond line there from 206 to 234, a lot of that is because we're so lucky and grateful to have the new Y2Y shelter open this winter. So we had a bump in beds, which results in a bump in the count. So just one piece to understand about the data. And then similarly, I went back to 2009 for the family time chart just because it's so dramatic. And it speaks to the point that was made earlier about how the state controls the family shelter system. So that nosedive from 2009 to 2011 in family shelter utilization is purely because the Gateway Inn stopped being a motel used by the state to house families. So it looks like we're doing a really great job in ending family homelessness, but it's purely a quirk of the inventory change. So I just think it's helpful context for when we're looking at these numbers. And then shifting gears into the programs available in Cambridge, I think Ellen did a great job in calling out how incredible the provider community is, and it's so great to see so many of them here today. This is just a really rough graphic presentation of sort of the programs available. Supportive services and resources are so important at every stage of crisis intervention and getting people housed. And unfortunately, that's one area where we really have been challenged lately because of the HUD funding that we rely on. We've lost a lot of supportive service dollars over the last 4 years, and HUD's really made it clear that they're not prioritizing these service dollars moving forward. I mean, they are prioritizing housing, but it's also a challenge to try and fill the gaps for a lot of these supportive service projects that we've lost. And then I'm just going to quickly, I have sort of a slide for each general component. I'm not going to talk through every piece here, but just wanted to talk a little bit about the prevention resources we have available in Cambridge, mostly based out of the Multi-Service Center, primarily funded by Emergency Solutions Grant dollars, but we have case management, legal assistance, financial assistance to help pay arrearages. And then one project we're really proud of is Support for Tenants at Risk. It's STAR is the acronym. And its intent is to try and replicate the tenancy preservation program that's available in a lot of communities in the state who have a housing court. We don't have housing court in Cambridge, so it's essentially trying to replicate that program model in the district court setting. And a lot of the partners in that project are here, and we are very proud to be able to offer that service in Cambridge. Street outreach and drop-in services, a huge important piece in the crisis intervention model. I know that there's going to be more discussion about this piece later on, so I'm not going to spend time on it here. Also not going to go through line by line, but just it's really just taking our housing inventory report and translating it into a PowerPoint. I think it's helpful to see what the units and bed availability is in each of these component types. Again, I think the Y2I Harvard Square is one of the great examples of the community coming together to identify a need and fill it. And huge shout out, I think I saw Sam and Sarah here today. Just so inspirational, the work that they've done in addressing youth homelessness for the region. Transitional housing and rapid rehousing, the one piece to note here is I think we heard Boston talk a bit about rapid rehousing. This is a relatively new component type that HUD is really prioritizing. They're encouraging projects in a traditional transitional model to shift into a rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing project model. And actually a number of the projects listed here, because of these shifting HUD funding priorities, are making the change from this transitional time-limited model into a permanent housing model. And then finally, the permanent supportive housing projects, we have a lot of them. They are very, very important to addressing homelessness and ending homelessness. I think that the one piece to note here in terms of one of the struggles we have in Cambridge, and I'm sure across the region, is the difficulty in finding units, and particularly units that fall within HUD's fair market rent limitations. So their fair market rent limit for a one bedroom for right now, fiscal 2017 is $1,372. So it's very, very, it is impossible to find a one bedroom in Cambridge for that.
Sorry to interrupt. Do you have any data on how many Section 8 or voucher households are in Cambridge and have been increased or decreased over time?
For the full Section 8 numbers, I don't have those. That's a Housing Authority data point. So these are I should clarify, these units and the inventory listed here are PSH for formerly homeless.
So I'm going to just reiterate, because people are coming in late, we're not taking questions from the audience because we have to get through these presentations. If people have questions, you can email them to Jamila Bradley. And there are feedback sheets as well at the outside on that table. We will make sure we get everybody's questions answered, but and we will also at future meetings have a more open discussion where we will take public comment and questions, but not for today. Thank you.
All right. Well, I think that actually is the last piece that I was going to discuss on the inventory and what we have available. So I will turn it over to Shelley to talk about what we're doing.
Great. Excellent. So obviously, a big part of why we collect data is it tells our story related to the needs that we have currently, and I'll also take this moment to thank everybody in the room who on a daily basis is so meticulously helping us track the need, because this is such an important metric. But what it also does is it shows us what we're not doing, and I think that, you know, as we look forward into various planning processes, one of the things that has happened, particularly over the course of the last couple of years, is an acknowledgement that in spite of all of the great things that we are doing, we know that we're not where we need to be in relation to addressing homelessness in our community. So a lot of you in the room actually had an opportunity to participate in our charrette on homelessness that happened last year. A national technical assistance firm, the Corporation for Supportive Housing, helped facilitate this what I would call a wide-ranging community conversation related to a number of issues related to homelessness in Cambridge. And part of